We do have still
Welcome, everybody.
Yeah.
Why can't I see everybody? Oh, there we go.
There you go.
There's everybody's faces. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Todd, and I manage the Phoenix Bookstore in Burlington, Vermont. For those of you that are joining us from far away, Burlington is an awesome place. You should come visit. And thanks so much for coming in. I just wanted to take care of some housekeeping first before we get going. You guys are all muted, and that's so that we can hear our presenters and our tonight. So when we get to the question and answer period, which we will have, we'll ask you please to use your chat function and ask your questions that way. And then we'll read the questions to our presenters and our author, and they can answer them that way. So what's going to happen tonight is I'm going to introduce Linda Lane and Katie Kirchhoff here. Linda's book is, I don't know if you can see it, The Laser Lady Meets the Light Junkies. It's a great book, got a great cover. And Katie's here. And Linda and Katie are going to be in conversation. And so after that, we'll have questions and answers. The book is available from Phoenix Books, and Michelle, my colleague here, is going to share that with you all, how you can purchase the book, the link. There's a hardcover, and we just heard that there's now paperbacks available too. So both of those are available for purchase from our Burlington store. Check out Michelle's little note there if you're interested. Okay, and so now let me introduce our featured speakers for tonight. And we have Linda Lane, who I said is the author of this great memoir about holography, Laser Lady Meets the Light Junkies. And Linda, well, I'll let her explain how she got into this, but she was born and raised in LA and graduated from USC, actually studied with Francis Ford Coppola, which blew my mind when I heard that. That is really amazing. And during the 70s, she was involved in writing for television and the movies, so teleplays and scripts, and got interested in holography. And I don't want to get too much into that. I want to let Linda talk about that. But really fascinating, and was there at the very beginning of everything. So I'm really interested to hear about that. And now it lives right down the street from us here in Burlington. So we're really happy. Linda, thanks for doing this. And then we have Katie Kirchhoff, and Katie is the, Katie, what's your title there? I don't know.
Oh, I'm the Associate Curator at Shelburne Museum.
Associate Curator at the Shelburne Museum, which if you have not gone to, and you live in Vermont, shame on you. You should definitely get there. It is a really, really great museum. And if you're going to travel to Vermont, you should definitely check it out. I try to go at least a couple times every year. You always get something different when you're there. That's a really amazing place. And so Katie has been at Shelburne Museum since 2016. She organizes a lot of the exhibits and publications that focus on the historic collections at the museum of American fine, folk, and decorative arts. And like, for example, if you are a quilter, you should definitely go because, oh my God, the quilts there are just amazing. So Katie trained as a specialist in American art history and decorative arts and material culture. She graduated from Smith College with the BA and from the Winterthur program in American material culture, and has a PhD from the University of Delaware. So really, really well qualified in her field. And I'm really, really excited to hear you guys talk. And thanks again, everybody, for coming. And I am going to shut up now and let Linda and Katie do their thing. And then we'll get to the question and answer period. And thanks once again for coming, and I'll hand it off to you guys. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Todd. This is a really nice occasion, and those are really gracious introductions. So I'll tell everyone a little bit before we get going. I met Linda a couple years ago. I was working on an exhibition at the museum called Eyesight and Insight, and the exhibition hasn't happened yet. The pandemic has sort of had its way with us, but we got to talking at an opening about holograms, and I didn't know much about them, but over the course of several months, Linda shared a lot and opened my eyes to a whole world of objects that I was excited to think about in a totally different way. And so tonight, I thought we get to talk for a little while and hear some of the most interesting parts of Linda's experience with this. I know I've really enjoyed having conversations with her about it. And so I thought we might get started. Linda, do you have anything that you want to sort of go into before we get going?
No.
Awesome. So I wanted to start out with kind of a broad question. We always have a really good time chatting, and one of the things that comes through to me in our conversations is your sort of deep knowledge of this, but also your incredible enthusiasm. And when you tell stories about your time in the 1970s surrounding this period of your life, you do a great job of conveying an energy and a real sense of the sort of, you know, running by the seat of your pants, that a lot of what the development of this was involved. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about sort of what got you so hooked on holography, and sort of what made you think about writing a book like this?
Okay. Well, I mean, what got me hooked on holograms was seeing a small cannon floating in the middle of a cylinder. And I had never seen anything like that. And when I was told that you could make a life-size hologram, I, used my imagination, came up with an idea for a screenplay, wrote a treatment, and 3 weeks later, I got the money to write the screenplay. The catch was I had to find someone or a corporation who was capable of making a larger than life-size hologram, because there was a segment of the movie, it all sort of, the story goes to a crescendo, and suddenly there's an image that comes off the screen into the audience, and then the image disappears and it goes back to the movie. Well, no one had ever done that, and no one has still not ever done that. So, now is a good time to do that. But that got me hooked, and I was just absolutely so fascinated. It was like falling down a rabbit hole, and I've never come up for air. I have a large collection of holograms. I've produced holography exhibitions, but the reason I wrote the book, because that's the question, is when I went on this journey, I was in San Francisco when Lloyd Cross and the original people from the School of Holography got the call in the middle of the night. It was like, it was like 10 o'clock at night, West Coast time, to find out if Lloyd Cross could actually make the machine that would make a hologram, a moving hologram from motion picture film.
Wow.
And at that time, at the School of Holography, they'd run out of money. And the power was off. I mean, it was a pretty perilous night. Everything was illuminated by candlelight. And Lloyd thought about it and said, yes, I can do this, but I need $500 to turn the electricity back on. And it started from there.
Wow. It's, when you think about things like this that happen and the incredible luck and serendipity for so many things that happen in our world, something that struck me over and over as I was reading the book was how serendipitous so many of these connections were that helped to kind of fuel each new step in the development of this new medium.
Yeah.
It also, it's that idea of having a hologram come off the screen in a theater for me. So I'm one of those people who, I don't know if there's anyone else out there like this, but every time I put on a pair of 3D glasses in a movie, right, it always is like a 3/4 experience. Maybe it's my nearsightedness, I don't know. But that idea of being able to see this sort of glowing object that, you know, comes out into your space, I think is a really powerful kind of experience for anyone. So what happened to your screenplay?
Well, actually, if you read the book, it tells you a lot of what happened. And then ultimately, Sam Peckinpah wanted to direct it. And unfortunately, he died.
Oh,
So I have it sitting on the shelf and it's just waiting.
wow.
That's
Wow.
what happens with screenplays. You know, I mean, that's why I wrote a book, because when you write a book, it stands alone. When you write a screenplay, you need an army of people to make it happen.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's interesting. You and I have talked a lot about sort of the differences between writing for a general audience, writing for academe, those kinds of things. I imagine screenwriting is a whole different kind of thing. It's not something that I do, but it was interesting reading your book, starting to learn a little bit more about. I mean, I learned a lot about sort of the industry in general and how an idea goes from this kind of germ of an idea to something that has legs. And I thought that was really interesting in sort of thinking about this. And also, you know, just the idea of seeing this new technology and then being able to sort of think and project what useful might be done with this. And so I wanted to, everyone, Linda and I have been talking about this for a little while, and in our conversations, one of the things that really struck me, and I'm a visual learner, but it was, some of these things are hard to imagine if you don't see them. And so Linda was good enough to dig up some pictures. And what I'm going to do is I want to share some of those with everyone. If you'll bear with me, I'm not always the best with tech, but I think I've got it. So Linda, can you tell us a little bit about who we're seeing here?
Yes, this is Lloyd Cross, and Lloyd Cross was really one of the main pioneers of holography. He and an artist and holographer named Jerry Pethick started the School of Holography in San Francisco. And Lloyd had been a physicist in Ann Arbor and had worked in a corporate setting. And he and Jerry Pethick went out on their own and produced, I think, the first holography exhibition in New York. And that was before they arrived in San Francisco. And it was really, it was like meeting Thomas Edison. I mean, it was really so exciting to see somebody who was so inventive and brilliant and surrounded by brilliant people. And one of those people is a holographer named Lon Moore, who I met there, who went on to be very successful as a holographer. But there are a lot of people who just threw themselves into learning how to make holograms and then making holograms, and some of them went on to earn a living. Wow. Lloyd was really the mastermind behind the multiplex hologram.
So if I wanted to become a holographer, and I were to prepare, were most of these folks coming out of like the physics world? Were they academics? Like,
definitely.
Was that the body of knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, you had to, I'll give you a kind of comparative, which is, if you look at, say, an old-fashioned camera, if anybody knows what one looks like now, because nobody uses a camera, right? But if you take a camera and it's all self-contained, if you think about making a hologram, the whole room is comparable to the inside of a camera.
So it's a little bit like a camera obscura? Like a whole sort of box? I'm sorry, that's not fair, but
I mean, it's literally like it has to be a vibration-free room. I mean, there are very specific things that you need in order to make holograms, and that's that at that time they were finding out if they could do something or if they couldn't do something, and so you really needed people who understood physics.
Yeah.
I mean, that was terribly important. I mean, and now if you want to learn to make holograms, you can obviously take all kinds of university courses.
Well, now that the information has been partially codified, that gives me a really good segue to this next image. And this, you had to explain to me a little bit about what I was seeing. But this, I think, is a really helpful visual for everyone tonight for just understanding the complexity of these kinds of machines. What is that?
This was building the multiplex machine and the printer. I mean, basically, the film is originally shot in a rotating on a rotating platform, so that all of that film is then, it has to
Get a
be
360-degree perspective.
correct, and then it has to be shot again onto holographic emulsion.
Wow.
Okay? And then it has to be developed. And if you look on your screen, you'll see a typewriter. So you can see that somehow they had incorporated this typewriter into the design.
Yeah, it has a kind of wonderful Rube Goldbergian kind of quality, right? Like, I wonder what we need here. Like, let's see if we can plug this in and make it work.
Well, exactly. That's why I found it so absolutely fascinating. You know, people say if you look at a big corporation like TRW, they had all the money in the world. If they needed a part, they ordered it. In this milieu, if you needed a part, you figured out how to make it.
Yeah, I love that. You did a great job of sort of conveying the energy of that in your book. And something that we started talking a lot about really very early on, a couple years ago when we started discussing holograms and sort of the large catchment of objects that might be considered holograms. What came out was that there was this sort of real difference, or that there was a range. I guess that's a better way to put it. There was a sort of spectrum of objects that all use these sort of burgeoning technologies for different purposes. And I wondered, we've got some images to sort of help us along, but could you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah. Okay. All right.
I love these.
In the book, I talk about the shoes. What happened was Beth Ann Creer at the LA Times was going to run a story on my partner Cecile and I.
And I can actually, hang on, I'm going to move through here because I've got this great picture of you and Cecile.
Okay, so this was actually taken by the Times, and it shows the jewelry and, you know, kind of what we were up to. Well, she called me and she said, we're not running a story on jewelry, we're running a story on shoes. And I said, well, what if I bring you a pair of Lumilar shoes? And so she then said, okay, see what you can do. And so I went to Fred Slatton, who was the man who dressed Elton John, you know, all of, like, everybody in rock and roll. And he had the shoes that you see. And I said, if you give me a pair of shoes, I'll bring them back with Lumilar all over them. And so he didn't know me from Adam, and he gave me a pair of shoes, and they were like $225. This is, you know, in the early 70s. That was a lot. And I took them away and we put them together. We got a full page in the Sunday Times magazine.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. And from then on, we started doing shoes for Fred Slatton. And we did the Jackson 5 shoes. We did a lot of shoes.
Wow. I mean, shoes are fabulous things. I feel like these days, I just got an email from our local shoe place down here, and it was like, get your next set of clogs for working around the house for the next 6 months. But these are terrific. And I wish we were the same shoe size. I would totally borrow them from you. So these amazing Lumilar shoes, the bracelets, and then there are these other objects. Is it okay if I move forward to them?
Yeah.
Okay. These are so beautiful.
Okay, those are dichromate earrings. Dichromate holograms are a very specific kind. The holographer has to use dichromate emulsion, which can be very tricky. It's very sensitive. And these I bought at the Museum of Holography in New York, and they still look like that, which is very hopeful, because you never know. I mean, that's one of the tricky parts of holography. Then the necklace was Richard Rawlinson, and that's held up as well.
Oh,
I did have just a quick just a quick story. I had a hologram, a dichromate hologram that I loaned to the Franklin Museum in Philadelphia, big one. And they exhibited it, and it came back to me, and I loved this hologram. I had it on a table, and the sun, was showing someone holograms, and I set it down for a minute on a table. The sun came through the window and cooked it. And that was...
That's, that is an issue. We think about it a lot at the museum. And especially now, given, the new kinds of materials that are being developed that artists use for various kinds of projects. One of our big concerns is, how do we prolong the lifespan of these new materials? And there's a lot that we just don't know. In addition to these, so I'm going to put back at this picture of you because I think it's such a great picture. There are a couple other objects that you've had around your office, and I don't know if you still have them nearby, but one of the conversations that we had was this there's these sort of two worlds of holographic media, right? There are these sort of novelty items, and they include things like the kind of starburst glasses that you can put on. They're little paper ones. And you have another pair of glasses that I think they might be my favorite thing that I've seen you on the Zoom with. Do you have them around?
What did I do with them?
Everyone, they're worth it, I think, if you can see.
All right, well, I will, I cleaned off my desk. This is
all right. If you can't find them, it's not a big deal, but
no, but it's really funny because cleaned up my desk in years. Here it is.
I'm sorry. So there are all of these sort of this broad spectrum of objects. So everyday objects that you might pick up, at the 5 and dime, or these sort of more fine art kinds of objects. And one of the great conversations that we had very early on was about a Rudy Burkout image. It was this image.
Yes.
So it was hard for me to understand what I was seeing when you first showed this to me. But maybe you can help me see clearly with those. Yes.
Yeah.
This is the Linda Lane that I think you should know wrote this excellent book.
I don't know if you can see it because the screen is primarily...
A little bit. So those eyes that you all are seeing on her glasses are in fact a holographic reflection. And I think they're so terrific. So I'm glad that you shared those. So on the finer end of things, there's some really interesting objects that you and I have discussed, and this is one of them. Can you tell us a little bit about this image?
Yes, Rudy Burkout is, in my opinion, one of the great fine art holographers. He figured out how to really sculpt light into this kind of unique imagery and to get the color. I own this hologram, which is really, you know, it's absolutely fabulous. Now, in talking about that, one of the things that Katie and I have talked about is displaying a hologram like this, because this is one of the limitations of having a holography exhibition, because you have to be able to see it from a very specific vantage point, or you're not going to be able to see it. You have to be at the right height, and lighting it is very, very important. So that's why people don't see more holograms.
Yeah, it's in doing a little research months ago, you know, there have been some sporadic exhibitions, but you're right, that sort of challenge in creating the correct environment. And, you know, like I'm 5 feet tall, it's going to be a totally different experience for me than it is for someone who's 12 inches taller.
Well, I had just, you know, years later, I produced a show with a couple people, and in Los Angeles, it was the first fine arts hologram exhibition, and Michael Crichton came, and he was 6'6", and so we were looking at a hologram, and he wanted to buy it. He really loved it, but he said, I don't know how I'll be able to hang it in my house and have everybody appreciate it. And I had no answer at that point. I mean, you know, short of getting something that went up and down, I couldn't figure out how you could actually install it.
A little lift or a sunken floor, maybe. maybe a moving mount. That issue of size and reception is really it's a sticky issue when we think about how to view these objects and how to sort of standardize viewing conditions for folks. And as we got to talking through this, there's one particular hologram that sort of stands out beyond many. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you a still of it. So this is the still, and what you're seeing here is the first cylindric chroma hologram portrait of Alice Cooper's brain, shot in 1973 and sort of organized by Salvador Dali, none other than the Dali. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop share and go back to it and share a short video because it gives you a sense of what these objects are like in the round. So if you'll just bear with me for a second.
And you also have to remember that this was the hologram that inspired the machine.
Right. So yeah, and let's do you want to say a little bit before we get started, or should I?
No, go ahead.
Okay, get ready everybody, because this is a wild ride.
Got a call from Salvador Dali's people that wanted to meet us. I said, this could be great. He's the guy. It's like meeting the Beatles. We go to the St. Moritz Hotel. Salvador Dali walks in and he goes, the Dali is here.
And then he went into this speech about the Dali, the greatest artist, Lee Cooper, the greatest artist.
He wants to do this moving hologram. He said, I want you to sit in the middle and wear $4 million in diamonds. And he has this brain with him. And he goes, this is the Alice brain. It's got ants crawling all over it. And the ants spelled out Alice and Dali and a chocolatey clear running down the back.
Alice being with Dali was as significant as a record because it defined who he was. Alice was becoming a real icon.
All right. So talk about a picture being worth 1,000 words. The people who you saw there were, of course, Salvador Dali and Alice Cooper, the sort of shock rocker who preceded all sorts of fabulous musical acts in the 70s and 80s and 90s. He really set the stage for a lot of things. And this kind of conceptual art that he was involved in making was really important for a lot of folks who were sort of that period moving forward. So do you want to talk a little bit about this and your involvement with Dali, Linda?
Yeah, well, I mean, initially, the person who worked with Dali and continued working with Dali was someone called Selwyn Lissack. And so he had come out to San Francisco to the School of Holography, and he worked with Lloyd to make the machine. And there was a deadline because the Alice Cooper hologram was supposed to be exhibited at the Knoedler Gallery in New York. And so everyone was working day and night to make it happen. And this is actually takes me to the reason I was writing these diaries, because I felt that this was a moment in history. I really felt that holography was going to be something that would be very important to society for many, many, many years to come, that this was the future. And the only way to really record that future was by keeping a diary. And so just to, kind of show you quickly, I kept these diaries, and I think you can see just like that's just a page. And they're all like this tiny writing with, lots and lots and lots of information on a daily basis, because I knew I would never remember everything for lots of reasons. And also, other people didn't necessarily think this was a historic moment. The people who were next door to the School of Holography in San Francisco had a video company, and so they tried to get them to come over to shoot a video. And the guys said, we really don't want to spend the money on film. So you can see that this was really kind of crazy. And I took pictures of them making the machine. And I don't know who else, if anybody else took pictures, but I felt like maybe I was the only person who took pictures because everybody else was too busy working on the machine.
Well, and I should add here, Michael kindly reached out in the chat. The diaries were your basis for the book, and you mentioned this a couple times. You have the great quote, I think I'm going to get this right, keep a diary when you're young and it will keep you when you're old.
Yes.
And that, I think for many of us, especially now, this sort of desire to think about what's going on and record it. And sometimes you don't know what the special moments are while you're in them.
Well, see, I knew that these people were pioneers, and I knew that they were going to change the world. And so to be with a group of people like that and to be part of it was so exciting. I mean, you woke up every day just raring to go. I mean, there were so many things to do. And the problem I had was I had no business acumen. I mean, I had absolutely no sense of business. I'd grown up in a bubble. I trusted people. And I was just incredibly naive. So it took me a long time to figure out, oh, okay, business is run a certain way.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I understand that perspective. I have worked for so long now in sort of museums and academe that the idea of having to run a business, I think, scares the living daylights out of me right now. But it's so, the excerpts that you include in the book, I think really, they do a good job of again conveying that energy, but of really highlighting these wonderful vignettes that also, like, one of the nice things about reading your book was sort of getting this sense of what, you know, LA was like in the 70s, and the trip that you described to New York, where you meet all sorts of interesting characters. You know, it really catches that kind of quality. By the time I was old enough to go to New York on my own, right? Like, most of the city had been cleaned up. It was not the same gritty city that you would have experienced 2 decades earlier. And that kind of just the grueling, like, you know, you gotta make it, like, fake it till you make it, was really, it was sort of heartening to read about, because it really, all of that hard work ends up paying off in these sort of wonderful objects.
Well, you know, just to go back to Salvador Dali, a few years later, beyond the book, I went to New York to interview Dali, and I was supposed to meet him at the St. Regis. And there was a wonderful, wonderful artist named Stephen Arnold, who was part of the Dali circle. And I was fortunate enough to be in a group of people who were in the Dali circle.
Wow.
Well, this whole thing had been arranged, and I was told what to wear, the colors, everything. And so I got it together. I put holograms together to show Dali. And I got to the King Cole bar at the St. Regis on time, and Dali wasn't there, of course. So I had a drink to steady my nerves, and I waited. And then I had another drink to steady my nerves a little more, and I waited. And I just kept thinking, well, is he coming? Is he not coming? And I just didn't know what to do, and so I had a third drink. Well, when he arrived, I was drunk, and it was, you know, and I was going to interview him, and just, you know, it's not so easy to interview somebody when you have had that much to drink. Well, so when he, you know, he came in with his entourage, and he sat down next to me, and everyone was dressed in black. They were people I'd never met. They were not the entourage I knew. And they were all, you know, pretty, like, strange people. You know, it was like going into outer space. So I gave Dali a hologram. And he said, "Oh, I don't accept gifts." And I was like, "Oh, okay."
I'm imagining the mustache too, right?
Well, I mean, it was scary. You know, it's like, well, you know, I was just trying to give you a gift. And so I set it on the table. And the next thing I knew, he reached over and grabbed it and kept it. You know, he just was, you know, that was who he was. And I met Gala, his wife, and I was told, beware of Gala. She can be very mean. And she was very nice to me. So I guess I wore the right colors.
Well, you know, it's interesting. So as I was looking around for a video clip of the Alice Cooper hologram, because it's hard to get a sense of its size if you just see a sort of still. But as I was sort of reading some of these interviews, and I should say, we found that video on openculture.org. It's a great resource for educators and all sorts of folks who work in the cultural sector trying to, you know, convey big ideas in tight timelines. But one of the interviews that I was reading, it was an interview with Alice Cooper about this sort of period of time working with Salvador Dali. And one of the things that he mentioned was that, you know, he had all these conversations with Dali about organizing the shoot and about the way that things would go. And the one constant was that Dali would speak in like 3 different languages at once. And so Alice Cooper was like, I'm just gonna smile and act like I know what's going on here because this is crazy town. But it was, as he reflected about it, he spoke a little bit about how that was sort of part of the experience of working with the Dali, with sort of being swept up in this whole surreal adventure. And so it was wonderful to hear your stories about interviewing him as well. That must have been really something.
Well, it was, and Dali surrounded himself with the most talented people. There was a clothing designer named Kaizek Wong, who was part of that Dali circle, who passed away sadly in the 70s or in the early 80s. I don't remember which, but Dali gave him a room in his museum in Spain. There just were these. Daniel Luna is another one. They were just very special people.
Wow. So we've done a lot of talking about sort of fine art and sort of this world of sort of LA and New York in the 70s. And I was curious if you could spend a few minutes sort of making a little jump. And if you could mention, I don't know, 1 or 2 of your favorite holographers who are still working and innovating today.
All right. Well, working today, Sally Weber is an absolutely fantastic artist. And I have to say, I've been out of that world for quite a while. I really am not, an authority on who's creating great art pieces at the moment. But I will say that I know Sally Weber is. I believe August Muth is. There is a man named Jonathan Ross in London who is one of the great collectors, and he has a gallery. That's about all I can think of at the moment.
Nice. So another question that's sort of attached to that, one of the recurring themes in your book is this sort of idea of sort of coming up on the next frontier, and using this particular sort of brew of art, science, and technology to kind of create the next thing. And you and I have talked a little bit about this, but I was wondering if you have any thoughts about where holography goes from here. Like, we've made a couple hurdles. There are different ways to make these kinds of objects. Like, what's next?
Just to kind of combine this question with the last question, there is an absolutely wonderful artist named Anna Maria Nicholson who shot beautiful pulsed laser portraits. And I don't know if she's still shooting them, but I mean, she's made portraits of, I don't know, everybody from Walter Cronkite to, I think she's done some of the royal family. I mean, she is a truly a brilliant holographer. And when you think about, and Charlie Lysigorsky, and I have his work, he made some pulse laser portraits. So when you think about, say, combining art and what is going on in the future, if you can have a 3-dimensional portrait of someone that is, say, an art piece, just as a great photograph or a great painting would be, I would say that's one area that may be taken up going forward.
Wow. So I should add here, I think Anna Maria is on the call with us, and you mentioned her in the book. She sounds like a force of nature. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, Anna Maria, but it was really wonderful to hear your story woven into that. And I know, Linda, you and I have talked about Charlie's work here in Vermont. So I see you out there too. So from that, I want to get to the Q&A sort of soon, but I've got one more question for you. As a woman who, has a professional job and all those kinds of things, one of the themes that really came up in your text that I really connected with was this sort of like the challenge of like being a working professional woman in the world and those kinds of things that you encounter. And to kind of close our Q&A, I wanted to ask you, you've had this range of experiences from screenwriting to running a business. What's your best advice for female entrepreneurs today?
Okay, my best advice is get a job working for a company who does what you want to do and learn that business, which would include the pitfalls. You need to get experience, especially if you're in the arts. You also need to have a source of income, because in the 70s, when I was involved with all the things I write about, to be a starving artist was the mantle of an artist. I mean, you had to starve in order to be a true artist. Today, that formula doesn't work. And so to anybody who wants to be successful in anything, you really need to plot a course. And the more you know about what you're doing, the better. And if you're going to, if you really want an education, watch Shark Tank. I mean, I have learned a lot from that program. In every instance, if somebody comes in, they can have the greatest idea in the world. And if they don't have a plan, the sharks tell them, well, sorry, you're not there yet. And so that's what I would say is you really need to be grounded in reality and be willing to go for the long haul. Because sometimes you have pitfalls, and if you're really passionate, if you're really committed, then you'll figure out a way of surviving and going forward. Most of the people who became enormously successful had terrible pitfalls along the way.
Yeah, I've heard once, well, not once, I've heard more than once, that it would do us all good to have, CVs that are full of our like job rejections. The vast number of times we have fallen flat and had to pick ourselves back up.
If you're a writer, that would be like a 20-page.
It's good fodder for inspiration.
Just in this, it's like I've got a 32-page interview that I did with Chihuly, and the magazine I interviewed him for went out of business.
So Linda's talking about Dale Chihuly, in case you don't know who he is. He's a glass artist, and if you've ever been to a botanic garden or I don't know, there are a lot of museums
in Las Vegas.
Yeah. Yes. So really beautiful installations of his glass work.
Yeah.
So with that, I think it might be time to turn it over to the folks at Phoenix Books for some Q&A.
Thank you both very much for that. That was so wonderful. We really appreciate it. Linda, one of the questions that came up was a little bit more about the gender expectations specifically, and the sexism that was and likely still is prevalent in the arts and entertainment industry. How did you navigate that as you went through this journey?
Well, in the book, it's very clear. At that time, if you were a woman, you were prey. You know, it's just you had to be really smart, and you had to be really you had to be lucky. I mean, that's part of it. I mean, it was like playing chess. Today, it's much different, and especially after the Me Too movement, you know, it's not like it solved every problem, but it's helpful. Does that answer your question?
It does, yes, I think so, definitely. And then a couple of other questions that have come up. Chaluli, if I'm saying that correctly, is fabulous. I would think the interview might be of interest to other publications. So I think there's some, you know, I don't know how that works in the magazine world for getting that out.
Yeah, well, yeah, I obviously I will have to dig it out of my file and see.
And then a question from Ellen. She's curious if holography has reached the heights you envisioned.
It's very interesting. As far as the arts go, no, not even close. But as far as things like security, everybody has a hologram on their credit cards. Things like mapping, you know, military mapping, they're able to use holography to, say, map out some region in Afghanistan and see around corners and, you know, do things that they couldn't do before. As far as information storage, that is something going forward that is going to be of tremendous importance, because you can put the whole Encyclopedia Britannica on one 8x10 plate. So things like that are very important. And in medicine, at some point, you'll be able to have three-dimensional x-rays so that the doctor can actually just look all the way around your body part to see what's going on.
And so we have one other question from Michael, and he says that as you were passionate in your belief in the power of holography, you had to negotiate the cutthroat entertainment business in your quest to bring that technology to Hollywood, which we've talked a little bit about. And reading the book, it's clear that it wasn't easy. What's the main thing you feel you learned between the beginning and the end of the book's story?
I hate to say this, but don't trust people. That's my answer. It really taught me that, you know, if you're going to do something, dot every I and cross every T.
Yeah, and from the time you were involved in all of this, you know, starting in the 70s, I mean, that makes sense, and that it's carried through, because it is a difficult industry, and it's a difficult world to navigate in so many different ways.
Well, just as an example to kind of fill in that other question, and this goes to men and women, but you know, when you make a deal with a producer for a screenplay and they option your screenplay, well, obviously you want the film to be made, because if it isn't made, it's just going to revert back to you and sit on a shelf. Well, if you go to a meeting with producers and they say, we really want you to make some changes, but we don't really have any more money to pay you. Now, if you're a member of the Writers Guild, that's against the Writers Guild. But people who are trying to save money really are not as concerned about that as they should be. And now the Writers Guild has taken this up, and they're really trying to help writers get paid. But back in the day, if I was working with producers and they said, well, you've got to do this because we need these changes. You do want your film made, don't you? And it was like, well, yeah, I really do. So, you know, it's a very difficult, it's very difficult when you're dealing with compromising situations, and you have to make judgment calls.
Thank you for that. It gives us a new insight into different times and different industries, and it helps kind of as it connects to what we're seeing now in the world also. And so with that, I don't see any more questions in the chat. So I would, if you would indulge me, because I couldn't see it with the little thing, would you mind sharing your glasses one more time?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because they looked lovely, but the screen was smaller then.
Okay.
Those are great.
Those are great.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to turn it back over to Todd for a moment, and I will, oh, we do have one other question, or a statement actually. There used to be a shop in Dallas that sold only holograms in various forms. I don't know if it's still there. I visited a long time ago, maybe 30 years, and bought a beautiful rose hologram earrings. They held up perfectly and people still compliment them. So thanks for sharing. That was from Millie. And so I will put the link for Linda's book for the hardcover back into the chat again for people, as well as the phone number to our Burlington store. Linda is happy to go in and personalize copies. Thank you for that, Linda. And we will, so I'll turn it over to Todd, and I'll just share those links one more time.
Well, I wanted to thank Linda and Kate. Thank you so much for doing this tonight. It was so interesting. And I really appreciate the time that you spent on the book, Linda. And Katie, thank you so much. That was really, really great questions that you had. Thank you all for coming to our event. We appreciate that. And thanks for your great questions. And like we said, the book is available from us, Phoenix Books in Burlington. And you'll see the link there if you wanted to get it. It's a really fine looking book. And Linda will come by and personalize for you. So they make great gifts. And as we're saying these days, October is the new December. So it's time to really start thinking about the holidays. We think it's going to be a holiday season unlike any other, with social distancing and with some issues with publishers being able to print books and things like that. So thank you again, once again, for coming. I wanted just to give a shout out to Linda and Katie one more time and say good night, everybody. And thanks again. Bye.
Bye, thanks.
Thanks everybody for joining us.
Thanks, Michelle.
You're welcome. That was fabulous. I lost Katie's image, but she's still here?
She might have gone.
I think she might have left the call. That was wonderful. I loved the everything, honestly.
Good. I enjoyed it. It was
really great.
Fun.
All right, fabulous.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Linda. And Todd will be in touch. I know you guys have talked about getting books, and I'll be in touch with a couple of other questions with the video link as well after I get it edited for tonight.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
I'll see you soon, Linda.
Have a great night. Bye-bye.